We have more
Okay.
than half, so.
Yep.
Good.
So we will get started, and I will do my best on the Robert's Rules of Order. This is not something that I use in most of my meetings, and I'm pretty rusty on it. So I guess I'll ask a question. Maybe you all can just help me. Do I need to call a motion to call the meeting to order?
You don't need a motion, but each person should identify themselves.
Do a
Yeah,
roll call?
virtual
Okay.
meeting.
All right,
I
so
mean,
can
one
we?
way to do it is just call roll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
I was going to do. All right, so I'll just start with the distribution list. John Baldock,
Present.
Brian Crowns,
Present.
myself, I'm present. Michael McAteer,
Present.
Paul Kirshen,
Present.
Warren Leon,
I'm here.
okay, and absent are Jake Swenson and Scott Wood. So I will chair the meeting for this evening. With that, was everyone able to take a look at the meeting minutes that Jake sent out in the meeting packet? And were there any questions or discussion? All right, I'm going to take that as a no. So with that, can I get someone to make a motion to approve the minutes from last?
I move
Last
that we
month's meeting?
approve the minutes.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. And then we all need to vote to approve the meeting minutes from, hold on, let me find the date, August 18th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
All opposed? All right, hearing none, then the meetings are approved, meeting minutes are approved. All right, Jake so kindly put in a vice chair's update. I will confess, I don't have a whole lot to share. I know he was actually able to attend the climate event, I believe, on the 13th. And I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought he sent out an email or was going to, if he hasn't yet, kind of summarizing, what he learned. And I know there was a little bit of back and forth, someone asking a question on something that he submitted. So hopefully he can provide that update either through email or at our next meeting. Before I go further, let me just back up. I'm realizing that I forgot one thing to confirm our upcoming meeting dates. I apologize. So right now we have listed on the calendar, and hopefully you have an invite already in your calendars for October 20th, November 17th, and December 15th. And I'm going to share my screen while we're talking about this. Are there any issues that any of the CAB members have related to the dates of those meetings, or see any issue with any of those proposed dates?
Do we have any direction on moving to an in-person and or hybrid format for these?
I do not, but I thought maybe I could ask Matt if he has any knowledge or update on
It's
that.
up to the committee. So you
Okay.
really, the only issues are if you want to meet in the hybrid form, there's a limited number of rooms, I think only 2, that can
Okay.
support a hybrid meeting.
Okay.
And I think right now there are not many people that are meeting in person. The select board itself was meeting in person and now it's moved back to virtual at the moment.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a little bit of extra time tonight, I would say. Is there any strong feelings one way or another from CAB related to virtual, in person, or a hybrid option?
This is
Wow.
fine. I don't have strong feelings and could go either way. Personally, I prefer the virtual meetings just because it's easier. It
Mhm,
takes less
mhm,
time.
mhm.
But I'd be also happy to come in person if that's what folks decide.
Okay, okay.
It might be nice to meet once between now and the end of the year, and maybe as we stay current on, the whole variant and how people
Mhm.
are getting comfortable, and then maybe meet in face once. But I think there's some value to that. But I agree with Warren. I could go either way if it's just simply easier, and we know that we're going to have high participation when we do it, virtually.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah,
think,
Oh.
go ahead, Brian.
Echoing Michael, I do think there is some merit in seeing people face to face. It was great at Kate's going away event to see many of you. But then when I stack up, when I can go to the office anytime I want in my work. When I do the calculus of the benefits and the costs, I usually stay home. Just it
Yeah.
particularly saves a lot of commute time.
Yeah.
So I think there's some merit in meeting maybe sometime, but maybe not frequently, at least in the current environment.
Yes. It was John or
Yeah, I
Paul.
think personally I'd lean toward staying virtual for now. I guess Concord doesn't have a mask mandate for indoors,
Mhm.
but some of us like me work in communities that do, and have increasing rates. So I imagine other people are going back and forth between communities that have higher rates than others. So
Yeah.
to me, it's safer for now, but I think it depends on what the state of the virus is. The other piece is, I think the virtual meetings are more accessible for more people than in person. So there's some value to doing it this way.
I think you're theoretically correct. I will note I feel that our public attendance has dropped off since we've gone virtual, and I don't know, the reasons behind that, but I will say it seems like where we used to get a handful of people coming, we're now getting just a couple. Either we've gotten a whole lot less interesting, which is possible, or or maybe it's not top of mind or something. So something to consider. Okay.
And
I
with
think
that,
Yes, I think we should stay virtual until we can meet in person.
Okay.
my other
Brian,
comment was just on, I think there's the convenience factor, which I think is powerful for non-committee members. But
Mhm.
I still wonder about, are we at the point where we can assume everyone can get online who would want to in our community? And the answer is probably like 95%, but
Mhm.
that's one factor that's I think about.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. Well, I think since it doesn't sound like a strong push in favor of in-person meetings, why don't we at least plan for October being virtual for now, and we can always revisit as we learn more throughout the fall and winter. So, okay. All right. With that, the one other update that I thought I would share is that I have kind of as a follow-up to the Envision presentation that I gave to the CAB, and in connecting with the Sustainability Committee of the School, Sustainability Subcommittee of the School Committee. I have been able to get on a slot on their next, I believe it's a Sustainability Subcommittee meeting on September 20th is a Monday. It must be the weather, it's confusing me. So I'll give a very brief, it sounds like, overview. And Matt Root and I had a good conversation about it, and I think I was able to share a few things with him that at least piqued his interest, and he thought it'd be worth a further conversation. I did note that we just got an email as the, and maybe, I don't know if it was the whole town or if it was just parents of Concord school kids, but that updated us sort of on the progress where they're at. And it sounds like this schematic design phase, which is what they're currently in, is scheduled to be complete in November. So, I think my intention when I meet with them on Monday would be to, just ask what that means in terms of the outside of the facility, because I really think that's where I see opportunity for the Envision tool, or at least, kind of interacting with Envision. And I didn't quite get a sense of that from the email. So I will keep the CAB posted, but it's a little step in that direction, and we'll see what happens.
I just wanted to mention that
Yeah.
I bumped into Matt Root at Ag Day.
Okay.
And we had a brief conversation about it as well. And I found it really encouraging. And one of the things that I think he had learned through your conversation is that, while perhaps the details of the structure itself are not part of Envision, that the site is. And so he now sees that as relevant.
Oh, good.
He also mentioned that while we're pretty far along in the schematic design of the building, we really haven't gotten anywhere.
Okay. Good.
So we may be just in time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to encourage you there.
Excellent. Excellent. No, that's good input. That's, exactly in line with what I was wondering about. So yeah, so I'll keep you posted but at our next meeting on October 20th to let you know how that was received and if there are any, further steps there. So any other questions related to that? Paul, it looks like you might have a.
Courtney, can you let us know when you're meeting with the school committee, sustainability committee? Because I might like to listen in.
Okay, it's May. I said it
November.
again. That's crazy. September. I think I'm wanting to say Monday, honestly. Monday, September 20th, and it is early. I believe the meeting starts at 7:30, and he said I was first up on the agenda, so it'll be 7:40. And do you get the Zoom links or the invites to that?
I think they must be posted on the website.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Because I think the Envision tool might be very useful to use. So
I do too. Yeah, so something we can talk more about, but all right, well, with that, the biggest part, as you can tell from our agenda, the biggest part of the conversation tonight was to really discuss the priorities and try to get some momentum towards our next steps as a group, and agreement on those next steps. And then I think also champions of that. And so as you all are aware, and thank you all for that we're able to, Brian, no dissing at all. But that, those that were able to give a
You can call
priority.
me out, it's fine. I actually did go through the process. I just ended up not submitting it in the end.
Not
'cause
submitting
I
it,
didn't
okay.
like my answers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you got in
If
an
you-
argument with yourself, right?
Exactly.
If you
Yeah.
hadn't called yourself out earlier, I wouldn't have. But so Jake took a minute or a few minutes to summarize everything. And I've got that up here. Can everyone see my screen, by the way?
Courtney,
Yeah.
can, before we jump into that one,
Yes.
is
Yeah.
there, going back to the notes and updates,
Oh, sure.
are you aware, did Jake share any information, or maybe other board members, on where we are with the hiring of the sustainability director, now that the interview process, I gather,
Good question.
has been complete and somebody's, I gather, making that decision? I don't know if that's Kate Hodges, or maybe it's the town manager, but is there any follow-up to that? It's such a critical path.
Right. Jake and I did not talk about that. I don't know, Matt, if you have any update on that.
I
at all
got
or
an
not.
update last night.
Oh, you did? Great.
CSEC, yeah. So they said that the candidates got whittled down to 3 and now down to 1. So they have their chosen candidate. I believe they're just, negotiating terms. They hope to, get this settled pretty
Terrific.
quickly. And I think, the candidate pool was extremely strong. So people are pretty excited about who they were able to get. So
Good.
I don't have any details about who that person is, but hopefully soon we'll hear it.
Great.
Great.
And
Wonderful.
also just that, yeah, people were happy too with the process because it was inclusive, included inputs from at least from those committees. And I think you guys too, right?
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
I
right.
was on for one day of the 2, so I was there with 3 candidates.
Great.
And my feedback was it was people with different experiences, but it was a strong pool. So I was encouraged by both the process and the quality of the candidates. So I'm sure
Good.
with the
So
person,
you
our
know a
first
little
choice
bit
is
more.
good.
You've got it down to door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3.
Well, no, that was in the first round. So there's another day that unfortunately couldn't attend. That was in several other candidates. So I don't even know if the 3 I saw
Oh, okay.
how they
Yeah.
fared, but
I think there were
it was
6
encouraging for sure.
or 7 that were shortlisted, I
Yeah,
believe.
I feel like it was 7.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to sit in and then it conflicted with an all-day meeting and I withdrew.
Yeah,
and
it was
wasn't
tough to
able
read the
to, but-
time.
Yeah, the timing was tough.
But the folks that we did have there from the town, they did a great job in the structured
Good.
interview process. So again, very encouraging. I'm excited to see where it lands.
Great.
Yeah, it sounded like that we got a heck of a pool of the talent around Massachusetts. So that was
Yeah.
pretty encouraging.
Yeah, but 60 resumes initially and
Yeah.
which is huge. That's huge. That's especially
Really?
for that,
Yeah.
type of position, being it's relatively new, I would say, and there aren't very many communities that have such a position yet. Well, before we do jump in, any other updates related to last time's discussion that I don't want to miss?
In CSEC,
What's that?
yeah, last night's discussion, you said it at the Sustainability and Energy Committee, or?
No, I was thinking from our meeting a month ago.
sorry. Yeah.
But if it, anything else, even if it's related to last night's discussion.
Report out, 'cause, Jake was there as well, and you mentioned it earlier, Courtney, about the climate summit that Janissetti was
Right.
hosting. There were over 100 people that came. It actually caused a little bit of a technology issue. In that
Wow.
there were too many people, many that could not get in.
Uh-huh.
And subsequently, Jan has set up another time. And
Wonderful.
also, it was a little kludgy around trying to get everybody into their breakout rooms.
Breakout
Because one of
rooms.
the structure was to have people to choose between a narrative around heat pumps and applications, and then another on interest that people had with respect to purchasing and electric vehicles. But in the end, we had to actually, Jan had to move people one by one into the breakout rooms. But
Oh my gosh.
it was very spirited, and a lot of people
Great.
were expressing a lot of positive energy around their experience with heat pumps, which I think was in part the intent of that summit, was to get
Good.
people's direct experience.
Good.
So, yeah, so that's the summit.
Terrific. Well, if whoever hears of when the subsequent session is to be rescheduled, definitely keep us posted, I guess. I wasn't able to attend last night, but due to another.
On the
commitment,
20th at 7 PM.
Thank you. Can we add that to the minutes? On the 20th at 7 PM, that's Monday
Right,
in September, not to be confused with May.
right. They had a 100-person limit. They had 180 people that were trying to get in.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. But that's an unwieldy amount of people on Zoom,
Yeah.
for sure. I will just say, if Matt, you mentioned it, but I attended Ag Day with least 2 of my kids. And I saw strong representation from, I don't know who was leading it, but some folks there passing out literature about heat pumps. There was the electric car display at the library. At least a couple of booths, if not more, related to climate issues. So I thought that was great to see. So, all right. With that, then, if there's no other updates or questions, why don't we go ahead and jump into our discussion around the prioritization. So just kind of a quick summary. Most of you all know, the purpose of this, but when we did the climate action and resiliency plan last year now, or a little longer than that, there were a number of action templates or blueprints, I guess they were called, in the back. And I just pulled one up for a visual. And in those blueprints, there were champions that were named, and then key partners. So, really the groups that would sort of lead that blueprint for implementation, and then other partners that were anticipated to be involved. And so the list of sort of priorities that or strategies that Jake sent out, he derived from these blueprints, things that I think he saw as opportunities for CAB to take leadership on, be a champion of, or be partnering with. And I think it evolved a little bit over the number of months, but just a reminder that this is where this list originated from. And I actually went back to the list myself, or the blueprints myself, to see how many of these blueprints CAB was actually directly named as the champion. And I think I only found this one. So technically, because we only have one that's in our, under our direct purview, if you will. But that being said, I think CAB is listed in a number of different places, as well as key partners. So I think, the list that Jake put together is a pretty good snapshot of those areas that we can have influence and speak into. So with that, I thought we can maybe just take a look at the summary that he put together, and basically the way he did it was just tallied up all of the combined scores. The lower the score, the higher the priority, is the way that it works. And then I would like to give each CAB member an opportunity to sort of explain reasoning, why you prioritized the way you did, what you felt was important about that. And then, ultimately what we'd like to get to at the end of the evening is some consensus, maybe not full consensus, but some consensus on our top, let's call it 3 to 5 priorities. And we've got 6 now, so we're pretty close, right? But the reason I'd say, versus 1 or 2 is that we need to be cognizant that, the sustainability director will be heavily involved in this process, and whoever is being, offered that position may have their own sort of areas of particular interest and expertise, and might be able to be a champion in a different way. So this is with some flexibility. But I think if we, as a group, can identify, those items of high priority. Now, if you all looked at this and say, yep, I agree with that, we can go home now, or we can be done now. But I'd be willing to bet maybe it's, not quite there for all of us. And so, so that's really the agenda for the remaining time tonight. And as Jake told me, he said, if you get done in a half an hour, great, end the meeting early. But if not, that's okay too. So can everyone see? I can zoom out a little bit. Oops, I misspoke. I guess there are 8 here. 1, 2, 7, 8.
And we should have an offline copy as well. I usually find that easier to look at.
Oh yeah, yeah, and yeah, you may find that my version is too small. So if you're looking at yours, Jake did send it out. I don't remember, it was a couple of days ago, but so I think hands down. Oh, go ahead.
Can I make a suggestion here?
Yeah, yeah.
I found these results quite striking. There are 2 items that really rose way to the top. And then there's a third that's near to the top, and the others score much, much lower. I think we should start with that as an assumption that there's a consensus around those 3, and let anybody who wants to argue for something else to make a case for something else, rather than to just repeat the voting we've already done. I'm not saying that those are the 3 things we should decide on, but it would be nice for for folks to basically convince the group that the voting should be, that there's new factors to consider that would cause us to revisit that prioritization.
Right, right. That's fair. That's fair.
Appreciate the decisiveness there.
You know, just as a little bit of a backdrop too, building on what Warren was saying, I was actually surprised as I read through everybody's comments that those top 3 were surfacing over and over: the CMLP oversight, electrification, and also the coordinating with CEC. So that was actually, I was pleased to see that, rather than a real diversion between many people who felt the first one was first and then felt very strongly about the number 8 or something like that.
Right,
It was
right.
that was actually pretty refreshing to see that.
I agree, Michael. And I noticed John's got his hand up, and then I do have a couple of things I want to do before we get to that, to Warren's suggestion. But John, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not arguing that this would have changed the outcome, but in terms, I submitted the one about adaptation, and of course, no one got to vote on it because it wasn't on the list, right?
Right,
So,
right.
And then another factor for me is, I think each of these actions involves a different level of effort, which I think might be important to weigh. So for instance, with home energy scores, which I would like us to see us do, but if that's going to involve, you know, this board members having to get into the details of how that is to be done and make a specific technical proposal, I could see that being a fairly high level of effort. Whereas having the town do a vulnerability assessment, what I had in mind was making a recommendation that the town do it, which could be, you know, a 2 or 3 page memo that we draft and vote on. So, you know, I think there's that level of effort factor to take into consideration.
Yes, agreed. And it's something that I, wanted to discuss as we talk a little bit about this. I did want to give Brian just a chance, since he wasn't able to submit or decided not to just, share anything in terms of what you had come up with before we move on, and with the, oh, you're on mute.
You would think after a year and a half, I'd figure out the mute button.
I know.
Now, I'd actually been on a pretty good streak recently at work. But so the beauty of not showing your hand beforehand is I can change my mind and it's not,
That's
it
right.
can still be internally consistent. No, I basically would have, I think I would have been voted something similar to this. I do think John's proposal, I think, makes a lot of sense. I do think, it is the thing where if you think of flooding, drought, these are things the town, with maybe a even more forward-looking view should be looking at anyway. But even more so because the baseline is changing over time. So I endorse that one. The thing I'll challenge people on is I've, on the one hand, we voted through this climate action plan, so we absolutely should do it, and CMLP is a big part of it. But I really think of a lot of the work we do is anything we achieve in Concord really should be scalable, because if it's not easily applicable to another community, we're such a tiny drop in the bucket in the world, right? And that's where having a municipal utility, we're kind of an oddball. I forget the percentage for Massachusetts, but it's 15% of electricity is sold from municipal utilities. So is that really the area we want to focus, where we can scale that to other, to the rest of the world? Unless the counter argument is, well, we should sell the municipal utility concept because here's the things you can do that you couldn't otherwise do. And that may be powerful because we have controls there that an investor-owned utility doesn't necessarily have. So that's the main thing that comes to mind is it would be, we could succeed and hit a home run on things, but if they can't scale, then at the end of the day, maybe it's not that big of a deal. So that's where like the home energy score proposal I really like, because it's having window shop for real estate in Europe and France, where you in the window on when you look at a house, it has the rating right there in your face.
Right.
Whereas we don't have that in the US as much. So that one really speaks to me. It's something that's very scalable to houses across the country. And with that, I'll stop talking now. But those are some of my thoughts.
No, that's good. So you're just to kind of summarize, you're kind of thinking, what impacts locally, which is super important, but also then what can be scaled up that other communities can look at as an example for their communities. So they're kind of taking that leadership role, and so that's interesting. It's a way I hadn't thought about it, but okay. So I guess kind of building on what Warren suggested. Is there anyone who feels strongly that these three that sort of make up the top three, that there should be a different representative there? Maybe John just made that argument, and that's good. That's good. Anyone else, I guess, that feels strongly in a different direction?
I had one thought that seemed to be dangling at the very end, and in part I think it's like it runs cross currently through all of these, which is the role of money. Whether it's incentives, whether it's an on-bill loan program, the half a dozen or so that I think Hannah and the intern we had earlier that teed up all of the different vehicles out there that aid citizens to afford this stuff, right? And in the third one, there's actually where it talks about electrification and CSC. It talks about recommending different types of financing. So I felt that was there, but having it in my mind's eye, that being down kind of at the bottom is almost like something that would almost be at the top, but it wouldn't be singular. It wouldn't be the single most important piece, but it would be an attribute of every one of these, which is some thought on how money plays out, right? So
that's interesting.
I was less concerned seeing that it was on priority number 3 where it's pointed out directly that there needs to be some kind of thought towards that. But that was my thought about the financing. And that's the wrong word. I hate using that word financing. It sounds like that's like go to a bank, go get a loan. It's not financing. It's capital being put to work in a whole bunch of different ways to get people to go left instead of going right. You know what I mean? And the more we think about how we can ease that, because I think we heard back even from the climate summit that putting in these cold climate heat pumps, whether it's ducted or ductless, or whether you do a 50% solution, 100% solution, it's a good deal of money. And people have to have liquidity. And the people who seem to be out in the vanguard that are really putting these systems in appear to have that liquidity. But to Brian's point about all of this stuff should be scalable, we're going to have to think about people who don't really have liquidity. They don't really have a lot of money. Even if it creates a positive cash flow in 7 or 8 or 9 years, there needs to be some strategic thinking about how we can help on that side of the equation. But I think all that's going to become more and more apparent as we sort through the priorities.
Okay, good point.
I have a question.
Paul, hold on just a minute. I think Paul had his hand up.
Oh, John actually had his hand up first.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, Paul hasn't gone, so why don't you go first?
You're so nice.
No, I was going to say, as most of you know, I primarily work in adaptation of infrastructure and natural systems to climate change. But every talk I give, I always say the most important action we can do is control the emissions of greenhouse gases, because it's going to lessen the impacts. But I also say that no matter what we do, if we go to zero emissions today, we're still going to have climate change impacts we have to deal with. For example, the latest IPCC report, no matter what we do, we're pretty much locked into 1.5 degrees C increase in temperatures above pre-industrial conditions. And so I think one of our priorities should be something to do with adaptation. And so I just want to throw that out there. Yeah, I think the primary emphasis should be controlling emissions and electrification. But I think we've also got to do something about adaptation. And this thing about transferability, I think it's a really important, noble goal. But I think if we can show how to do it right with the resources we have, it's probably good enough.
Okay, John.
Yeah, so I'm glad Paul went first. So, so on the vulnerability, on the adaptation idea, I mean, the other thing, Paul cited the new IPCC report. So, besides being locked into 1.5 degrees Celsius, it also said that when the world crosses at least the 2 degree threshold, that in the Northeast US, we'll be crossing the 3 degree, because we're not warming evenly around the world, right? And I think Brian's point about transferability is a good one, although adaptation is something that is going to affect us locally. So I think it's an important thing to be planning for, even if what we do is not transferable. But that said, I think Concord faces a different set of relative risks than, say, urban communities like where I work in Cambridge. So I don't think direct flooding and extreme heat don't affect Cambridge as much as some of the urban communities, but there are other impacts, especially ecological effects on our conservation lands, because our ecological zones are shifting northward, on agriculture in terms of what kinds of crops farmers are going to be able to grow, water quality. And so, as Concord thinks through those issues and figures out, what to do about it, I think that what we do could be actually very transferable to communities like ours that have conservation land and have agricultural land and have surface water. And so, I think that's something to take into consideration as well.
No, I think that's, I was just going down to, I will get to the hands, I see the hands, but I was going down to our, I believe it was this one. Yeah, so we talk about that in the blueprints under the Emergency Planning Committee. I just think it's interesting that, it's one that is rising, or at least has risen to the top of the conversation tonight. And I don't know, if the Emergency Planning Committee is taking that on or is planning that. So it's something, for us to consider.
But it's not just about emergencies, right?
It's
just,
not, no.
yeah.
And so I wonder, if the way this one was sort of crafted, it's, it needs to be broadened, right? Warren, you had your hand up.
Yes, yeah, I think these comments about adaptation are interesting and make good sense. But what I want to talk to was about Brian's comment before about the municipal light plan, which I thought was very smart. But I don't think that's an argument against that priority and focusing on the light plan, but instead it suggests how we should address that task. What is it that we could encourage the light plant to do that is scalable or accomplishes something that has potential implications beyond our narrow borders? For example, getting the light plant to more effectively promote air source heat pumps, for example, is something that's valuable because it's promoting a technology that ultimately should be promoted in both communities that have municipal utilities and communities with investor-owned utilities. So we could think about how to work with the light plant in ways to accomplish things that really do make a difference that could transcend our borders.
So just if I could just add to that, and then I'm not sure who spoke up there, but something I'll note as I was looking through the action blueprints, I would say the majority of the champions that were identified for all the different blueprints that are in there are two entities, CMLP and Public Works. Those are the majority of the folks that are identified. And so I think it's interesting, that the top one here is, is our kind of collective idea is to, provide oversight, provide support, right, to CMLP. There's a number of objectives under the climate action plan. And so maybe building off of what Warren said is that it could be a matter of prioritizing those blueprints that are, within their realm and really, digging into that a little bit further, and thinking about those if there are any low-hanging fruit. Maybe there aren't, but if there are any low-hanging fruit in that subset of blueprints and actions that were identified for CMLP that we could focus on this first, this first next year, I should say. I don't know who I missed. I think I missed John. Yeah.
Well, I think Warren's point was important because I think there to be details or specifics in the light plant strategy that it's important for us to have input on. So, there was the recent report. I can't remember if it was just the Globe or it was someone else in the Globe quoting it about the Massey program and how many heat pump conversions have happened, and it's like a few hundred across the whole state, right? And so if the light plan's going to follow a strategy similar to Mass Save, then I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to reach our goals. And so it would be important for us to push on the light plant to take an innovative approach that's going to see much more deployment than what we've been seeing to date.
You know,
And I
and
think there could be similar things like thinking about energy resilience, how and the importance of integrated planning. There was an article in the Times today about how in New Orleans more people died from the heat after they lost power than they died from the hurricane. So I think we take for granted that the power is always going to be on, and maybe we should be pursuing microgrid strategies and things like that.
You know, I wonder if it would be helpful. I had sort of the same feeling about that first one. I think the first recommendation, I thought two things that were really salient. One is, because we've talked a little bit about this before, the language talks about provide oversight. It doesn't say for the board members to go and execute on an operations plan. You know, not to do the actual work itself, but to have the oversight. And I thought it would be helpful in that oversight if somehow when we're communicating on these priorities or these blueprints, that we tie something more quantitative to them. So for instance, you know, the light plant will say, without question, they're trying to support electrification of residents' homes and businesses. And after all, they did a climate summit, and they've hired coaches, and they're trying to, you know, penetrate that market. But no one has ever sort of sat down, and this is a little bit what John was saying. No one has sat down and said, well, if we're trying to go here, what are the metrics and the signals along the way showing that we're getting there, right? So like from a quantitative standpoint, because it's easier to talk to somebody about providing oversight if you say, well, you're trying to achieve this number and you're only 5% of the way. If we stay at that particular tactic, maybe we'll get to 7% of the way. And then it becomes obvious to both parties that something has to change. That's oversight, right? That says that maybe we need to shift the tactics, that something isn't getting us where we want to go. And I think the CAB can serve in that kind of quantitative way, because after all, the town is set very discreetly. It's not like we're wondering how many tons of carbon are we going to try to reach by 2030 or 2040 or 50. We know precisely. We said we even had people at town meetings support that number, right? So it's backing each of these blueprints into a quantitative frame, I think, that might bring us down to actionable items.
So far, just to, I guess, a checkpoint, what I've heard is, you know, I think generally everyone's feeling that this is kind of in its rightful place, but that it's too broad, needs to be sort of drilled into a little bit more as to the specific, you know, the specific priorities. So almost prioritizing that top priority into some specific actions. And then I think the other thing that I've heard, but I want to see, you know, if there's agreement, is that this last one that John offered that we didn't get to vote on, that there seems to be some support for, you know, bumping that up a bit. Is it bumped up to the top 3? I'm not sure. But that's so far what I've heard. Anything else that I'm missing? We haven't really. Oh, and I guess we talked financing. Michael brought up the point of financing, or how to raise the capital, and should that be, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but should that be sort of its own initiative and not buried within? And how would we, what would that look like as an action?
I have a question about that last action, the role of money. There was this summer, wasn't there an intern that was working on a report that has to do with the role of money in purchasing of heat pumps and the rebates?
Yes, there was. I don't know if she's completed her work yet or not.
Is there any follow-up to that is being considered, or will it be published?
I believe so. I don't remember the details of exactly the time frame, whether she's finished. I believe she gave us sort of an interim update, if I remember right.
Right.
But I think I believe Jake, as the chair of the CAB, is still working with her a bit. I just don't know if now that it's September and school is in session
Does
again,
that
if she
fit
has
into
gone
the
back.
question of the role of money
Mm-hmm.
by what you were talking about?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a piece of it. Yes.
I mean, it seems like there's a theme here about that the town, if it's going to meet its goals, really has to elevate its game, right? That we have to try some things that haven't been tried elsewhere or are rare. And the financing thing, I read this summer a story about Ithaca, New York, developing a program to harness private capital for energy efficiency and electrification. So apparently they have hundreds of millions of dollars of at least commitments to provide private financing. I think they probably going to have challenges about actually getting that money into projects, but it was a lot of money for a small community. So I was impressed by that. So it seems to me it's things like that rather than trying to do things that everyone else has been doing, or following, like the energy coaching services. I think it's good that the light plant's doing that, but those aren't new, right? Other places are doing that. And I think, and the experience in these other communities, there's a limited amount of success. And so that, by itself, at least, is not going to be enough. So we really have to find some other big approaches to addressing these goals.
Right. Paul, you had your hand up. Oh, you're on mute.
No, I was just going to say, going back to this adaptation, obviously there are adaptation actions which also further, mitigation of greenhouse gas reduction, which the town should be considering as well.
That's a good point. I was thinking that as well. That the two can dovetail in some areas. So I guess, we focused on, I guess, the top two, I would say. And I think, I guess I'm curious. So if this needs more definition before we can, specify what actions we might, specifically take. And I guess the one specific area that I think it was Michael threw out there was the idea of setting metrics related to these actions. He's not there. Oh, I don't know where he went. You're very foggy, Michael, in your video. But in terms of, I guess, some of the rest of these, are there any, it's one thought I had was maybe a little bit different way to look at these is biggest bang for the buck sort of thing, and the buck being level of effort or level of maybe it's just that to move them along, to actually gain momentum and to make, you know, progress towards our mitigation goals. Are there any that stand out as you know, I'd say a lower effort, high benefit than others? I think, Michael, when you did your assessment, you took a stab at that.
Yeah.
But, you know, do any of these that are left, let's call it, you know, 16 through 43, maybe even to the end, jump out as, you know, relatively achievable or not even achievable, but we can move it along fairly readily.
May I make a comment
Mhm.
regarding the 26th one and the relationship with the CSEC group?
Sure, yeah.
The CSEC committee just met last night, and we're in a formative sort of area the same way that your group is. But within, one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that the relationship between CSEC and the CAAB group has always been, to our group at least, one where we are involved with engagement, and where the CAAB board is more involved with policy development. And I think that to the extent that the basic description is given here of what that working plan is, it would be useful to take it back now to the CSEC board and kind of try to flush our side of it out on in our next meeting.
Okay.
And to the extent that you want to do it, I agree with the statement that was made that your role is not to execute, but to on the operation, but to provide oversight to it. And the question is, how do we stay coordinated between the different committees and still be on the same clear focus about what's going to be happening? I think one of the things that CSEC was talking about last night that we're sort of in formation about is trying to have some more engagement events in the next year. And one of the things that has been pointed out, for example, just as an example, there is a sustainability plan that was recently published by the library in Concord. And the library is taking on a greater role in their effort to provide a focus on sustainability or run programs that have to do with sustainability. And we're interested in trying to see whether there are some of the small programs that we might be involved with developing or engaging with could be implemented partly through that context, or to have other types of things that are going on. Now, those things don't relate directly to the bullets that are notated here in this plan. And I know that we've talked about what this plan is in earlier meetings, like in June and July. But as we've moved along, we need to reemphasize the importance of some of this stuff that has to do with identifying homes heated with all oil or propane and estimate the emissions benefits, those things, and get that into something more concrete if it is something that we definitely want to happen. I mean, we talked about using the town's database and using that as a way to identify all the oil homes.
Sure.
And such as that. But I don't think we've got it figured out as a concrete path as to how to tackle this altogether.
So if I can summarize, I think what you're suggesting is that CSEC might be able to sort of be the engagement piece of this particular priority project. And, and it does say, in coordination with, but that, trying to help identify the roles of the two entities a little bit better in that particular effort.
Yeah, I would say that's
Okay.
that could be the case. The other thing that came out of the meeting yesterday that we're hoping for is we don't want to make firm decisions about what we're going to completely do this year until the new hire of the director comes in.
Right.
We want to make sure that we're in sync with what their thinking is.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case here too, as well.
So that's it in a nutshell, a little bit of stuff.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. John or Paul, I'm not sure who had their hand up first, but
Paul did.
one of you can respond.
Paul was first.
Oh, unmute, Paul.
I forgot to take it down. So it's John.
Yeah. So I thought it seems to me that the first and third recommendations could be related in terms of the discussion we're having tonight. So at the last meeting, we talked about how it was a big opportunity to target homes that are heating with oil or propane, in part because the carbon emissions reduction will be relatively higher, but it's also because it's more cost effective for them to convert than, say, a natural gas user. And so I could see that being folded into the first recommendation in terms of trying to make sure the light plant prioritizes targeting these homeowners or these buildings that are on oil or propane, because once they're probably under some pressure to convert to something else, whether it's higher efficiency oil or to natural gas if they have it available. And so once they do that, they're not going to probably convert to heat pumps. And so I could see those being kind of merged. And if I'm a little unclear what the roles of CSEC and CAB are relative to each other, but if perhaps the combination could be, both boards could do it, but we could advocate or discuss with the light plant the prioritizing of that kind of targeting, but then CSEC takes on more of the role of digging in on figuring out, well, how do we get that and make that a reality?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's just that it's CAB could help to define some of those metrics and prioritize those to working with CMLP to and wouldn't it be great if that went into their plan that they're working on, their plan update potentially, and then maybe CSEC can be the boots on the ground, so to speak, in terms of engagement and relaying that and figuring out ways to engage the public in relation to those metrics.
I think that if there are programs that you want to prioritize that way, it's really important to sort of send CSEC communications saying that you think this is really important and you'd like support in it.
Good point. Okay.
And I'm willing to carry some of that message, but it needs to be a broader based thing too.
Right. Okay, so it seems like we've got some further definition here maybe to do. And then maybe this one gets folded in potentially. How are we feeling about the home energy score? I think someone mentioned the potential for, high effort, high benefit. I guess I was actually thinking maybe the opposite, that it would be a low amount of effort. And I think the reason I was thinking that is that I feel like we might be able to do it with without a lot of partners or stakeholders involved. Not that we just push it through, and we'd certainly want to get input, but thinking that it might be something that could be undertaken fairly readily. Maybe I'm wrong there and I'm underestimating that. So I don't remember who said they felt like it might be high effort. And if you want to share more of that reasoning, that'd be great. John, you have your hand up.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can say something, but I just forgot the answer. I mean, it seems like there's a methodology to doing the scores. I mean, we probably need to look at that some more and think about how it applies in Concord. But I think the challenge would be figuring out the mechanism to apply the scores. Like, are we going to pass a bylaw that says if you're selling your home, then you have to do that, or is it something else? I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know, and maybe this is something we'd have to research further, but in my mind, this, can be somehow put out to all residents. Now, if it's only upon sale or transfer of ownership, maybe that's a different scenario. But I guess in our original conversation, I thought there was some way to share this with both, existing customers and transfer. And maybe that looks different, but sharing that information in some way. And my thinking was the home energy score. It gives knowledge, right? And it's right in front of you, potentially every month with your bill. I think at least that was one iteration we were talking about. Versus, the heat pump conversation is, we've talked, it's going to take resources, it's going to take incentives, it's going to take a pretty hefty effort. But all that to say, does information like that actually drive different decisions? If you have that information in front of you, is the research out there that shows people will, they will make different decisions, and what percent of people will? I think that was the calculus that was going through my head is, maybe it's relatively easy to put this information in front of people, but if research shows that they won't actually make a different decision, then it would be wasted effort. And we should, put more of our eggs in the basket of some of these other things that are going to be higher effort, but, don't want to divide our effort too much. I don't know. Does anyone have a thought on that or know of?
Well, Michael and Warren might know more. I think it's a necessary piece, but by itself, I think the results will be marginal.
Okay.
If you look at programs like OPower or home energy scores used elsewhere, just giving people information doesn't lead to a lot of change.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Warren?
Yeah, and this goes back to Brian's comment earlier about his experience in France. If we're going to do the home energy score thing, the real value added is to make it a requirement on the point of sale of any home. because then you're giving consumers information they can really use. And it would be a good precedent, and it would be the type of thing you would hope would spread to other communities. It's not done widely here, and we should do that. And I think it's actually a big project to try to get the town to pass that, but it's a really worthy project, both in terms of climate change and also in terms of consumer protection. You know, I know the real estate industry would be against it, but as I said the last time, what's the real argument for keeping useful information away from the consumer? Because that's what we're doing now. We're keeping useful information away from the consumer.
Right. Well, I sort of see it as the same, you know, years ago when people started putting the calorie information on their menus, right? I mean, it's that sort of information. And I think I even heard recently, I mean, you might know more than I, but that there's some play afoot to put footprint information on some products for different retailers, which I thought was amazing. I'm sure the retailers won't like that. You know, the folks that'll be impacted by that, but that's consumer power right there, to make decisions, to make better decisions.
Yeah, my feeling on the home scores, I feel like the near-term impact is probably marginal. But it's also sort of foundational in the long term, that you have this information and that this is part of the psyche of when you're making decisions about houses and so forth. And also even, I mean, I know giving people information doesn't move the needle that much, but I still feel like, well, you guys probably have more data in terms of the impact of power and that sort of thing. In the long term, I still feel like, again, it's sort of foundational, where if it's cultural, if it becomes cultural, then at some point it does move the needle slowly, glacially, but meaningfully.
Good point. Okay. Any other thoughts on that particular one that haven't been raised?
The investor-owned utilities got heavily into the home energy scores, but not so much of giving it a, you know, like they do in Europe, a green light, red light, and amber light, right? If you're going to buy something, but more trying to elevate the competitiveness in the citizenry. So they use very extensive software and big data from the specific usage of energy down to the home level, including demographics. Like if you've got a family of 9, obviously you're going to have an energy quotient a little bit different than a family of 2. So and they hired that package out, and they got approval from the department to where they could show results, actual energy savings results, where somebody, you know, I look at it even when I get it here, and I say, gosh, how come my neighbor, I thought I did everything to this house. I mean, I've done, you know, and so there is that sort of competitive nature coming out, and the evidence-based part of this, I think is a little bit out in jury, but the fact that they get approval from the department to take those energy savings that are coming from that very specific action says that I think it has, you know, it's kind of the thing, sort of the do all of the above, right? It's not going to be the panacea, but it seems to be getting people aware of what they can do. And then what's happened from that point, it's basically an engagement strategy. You know, once they take the data and they show a homeowner how it compares to others, then they don't let it stop there, right? They immediately say, okay, you could call this contractor in, you know, they bring in all of the other enabling attributes that's available to that homeowner to do something. But it's a pretty involved and long process, and essentially it was hired out to First Fuel to do that kind of exhaustive software development. And as I say, there seemed to be evidence-based information that it does move the needle.
Okay.
Yeah, and getting back to my long-term comments, so I'm thinking, my national grid bill, I think I'm slightly better than average than my peers, but I want to be in the left-hand bar.
Yeah.
I've
Right.
had Mass Save come to my house. They've done some
Right.
weatherization. I talked to the heat pump coach. Like I haven't pressed the button on like the big installation project and the big heat pump project,
Yeah,
but they're coming and they're
Right.
more likely to happen than they were without those things.
yeah,
So again, just I feel like it is a long game, and maybe I can do those things in the next couple of years and then have a little bit more data. But
right.
Well, and we're nothing but not competitive here. So I think we ought to use that to our advantage, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that recommendation, I think we should keep that one, but we could strengthen it to say that that the board will work on evaluating policy and program options that would make those scores effective.
Mhm.
And I think we have to do that in the context of we don't have time to be gradual or
Mm.
going at a glacial pace, right?
Mhm.
All the news is we got to go fast and really ramp up fast,
Right.
or we're in huge trouble.
Right.
And so personally, I don't see avoiding mandates with as much as none of us like doing that, but
Mhm.
how can you go that fast without
Right.
avoiding?
Otherwise, yeah.
Through
That's a good
volunteerism.
point. Yep. Okay. So I feel like we've talked well over these first three, and I guess there's some question whether these two meld together. Just taking these as sort of a group before we talk about this one again. It sounds like they're in their sort of rightful places, like the 4 to 7, kind of second priority, if you will, or second tier. Do any of these stand out above the others in terms of, low hanging fruit, high benefit sort of task that, we can sort of slot into that maybe solid, third spot here, if we need to, I guess is my point. Does anybody feel strongly about any of the others, or are they really, maybe it depends on, who comes in as our new sustainability director, and that, sort of gets worked out at that point.
I mean, another option would be to slot the adaptation one into the third.
That's true.
slot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point, John.
On the benchmarking thing, what I would point out is, I think how you do it is, pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't call it it'll take effort and resources.
Which
to
one
do
is
it.
that?
Not the one
one?
with,
Commercial? Yeah.
there are a couple other communities. So Cambridge and Boston have these requirements. A couple other communities, Newton and Lexington, that are talking about doing it. So I could see opportunity coming up to sort of add onto that, because there have been state proposals at the state legislature to create a statewide benchmarking requirement. And I could see that if enough communities adopt these, that the state will want to adopt a statewide requirement rather than have every community do it their own way.
Interesting.
But so I would put it in the category of an opportunity that maybe we should keep our eyes on.
Okay. Anyone else have any that they'd, like to discuss the merits of? not that we have to move it, but
I mean, the financing one could be folded into the first one too, right?
this
Yeah,
one
it's-
here. Mm-hmm.
It's actually in the electrification. There's
Mhm,
language
it
in there.
is.
It says that looking at recommend potential financing
right.
mechanisms, which that's the reason I felt that at least it was being addressed, and probably arguably addressed in one of the most impactful to actual carbon greenhouse gas reduction, which is a full court press on electrification of homes
Mhm, mhm.
and commercial buildings. So I would be really curious when the new sustainability director comes. She's going to be looking at the mapping, I think, in our plan that looks at those blueprints,
Mhm.
each one of those blueprints, and to see how how our priorities are fitting back into those blueprints.
Mhm.
Um,
You, by priorities, you mean
yeah, what
our
we're
priorities or something different
no the priorities that we state
that
here
we're
in,
talking?
in,
Okay.
in this summary.
Okay.
I think they do, but again, it goes back to what I think how we started the conversation, that is that
Right.
in those blueprints, there's a lot of ambiguity,
Mhm.
non-quantifiable.
Mhm.
Directionally, it's there. And I think it's also even embedded in the language in these priorities, but
Mhm.
it's just hard to, and it's evident when we see the partners. And if you look at the various
Mhm.
partners for
There's
each
so
of those
many.
blueprints, there's 10 of them.
Mhm.
You have
For
10
each one.
partners, right?
Yeah.
So who is the lead on it?
Who takes the lead?
And
Yeah.
right, and
Agreed.
then who's going to turn that into quantifiable? And again, these are some of the questions that I think our sustainability director can probably help with. If CAB becomes the mechanism for policy, I would submit also for bylaws and ordinance, because I sort of hang on to what John has said repeatedly, that we're not going to get where we want to go through voluntarism. I mean, it's
Right,
going to
right.
help. We're going to need some much more bold actions. But I think that will become more evident to us once we calibrate the quantitative success to the goals that we've created. It's going to become obvious to, I think, all of us that we're 2% of the way. So what are we going to do differently? And I think hopefully our sustainability director is going to see those priorities, those blueprints, the
Mhm.
direction we say we're going in. Does that get us over the finish line? Right? And that's a big question.
So related to that, then, I guess what I see, let me kind of bringing it all together, some of it anyway, is, keeping as one of our top priorities. We'll call it the oversight of CMLP, but maybe specific in that is developing a priority and metric target list for discussion with CMLP for that, that oversight or that coordination that really targets the mitigation piece that I think we all agree is high, maybe highest priority, but close second to that is the adaptation piece. And so, does that bringing this idea of a vulnerability assessment in or higher in the priority list then would address that adaptation as a close second priority, and then keeping sort of our foundational priority of the consumer knowledge, or educating, keeping education and consumer education on the forefront, I guess. I don't know. How does
Well-
Kev respond to that? How do you feel about that? Warren, you put your hand up quickly.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with that summary in two ways.
Okay.
I like the idea of giving higher priority to adaptation, and it should be one of the key things on the list. But
Mhm.
I haven't heard anything in this discussion that suggests why it should be higher than the home energy scores.
Okay.
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 I'm not saying it should necessarily be lower, but you were arguing it should be the second most important thing. I'm not ready to go there.
Fair
And
enough.
then I'm also not ready to go to broad scale consumer education.
Mhm. Okay.
Home energy scores is a very specific thing. It's
Mhm.
quite a bit different than lots of other consumer education activities, including the types of things CSEC has done well over time. So I guess in both of those comments, I'm trying to keep a very targeted
Narrow focus.
agenda
Yep,
item
yep,
related to the home energy scores.
Yep. Sounds good. That's good. Paul?
Hi. Obviously I've not been working with this group a very long time. So excuse me if I say something foolish. It seems to me that you might have like 4 categories here. I know Warren was just saying he wants to be specific, but since we're, I guess, more of a policy setting group, I wonder if we could think a little bit broader. Like one of our goals could be providing oversight, CMLP. Another one is something about looking at financing. Another one is looking at incentives for electrification, which would include a lot of these other ones, like, the commercial buildings, home energy scores, and so on and so forth. And so if we had like 3 or 4 broad themes, I don't know if that would be helpful or not, because they'd be less specific than what we're talking about now. But if we're trying to set policy, sometimes, broad outlines might be useful, but perhaps it's already been done. And then, of course, the other one would be the adaptation.
Right.
So sort of like, oversight, financing, electrification, and then adaptation.
Okay. Not sure, John or Warren, who had their hand up first. John?
John.
Yeah, so, I mean, for the adaptation one, to me, it doesn't matter where it is in the top 3, as long as it's in the top 3. If, the idea is we're going to focus on 3 things. The first one about the light plant to me is like, very high priority, but I think it's worth thinking about, well, what do we mean by that, right? So, I mean, Paul was bringing up, well, there are these principles that we should be thinking about, or concepts. One way we could put that first priority into action is by articulating a set of principles that the light plant should be taking into consideration as they formulate their strategy. So it could be that whatever their strategy is, that it has to be robust enough to help enable us to get to our goals. They can't just be approaching it incrementally, right? And it could be other things like, folding in the adaptation thing, the prioritizing of oil and propane, heated homes, energy resilience, I think could be in there. But we could formulate those kinds of principles, because then that's something you could evaluate the light plant strategy against, in terms of, did they include it in the strategy or address it in the strategy, right? The home energy score one, I think, could be reframed not to be so much about education, but about basically evaluating every building or every residential building in Concord in terms of its performance, so that we have an understanding of where our buildings are at. right? And then
Mm.
you can then do some planning around, well, how do you improve that performance? Education will be, and consumer information will be a byproduct or a co-benefit of doing this, but I don't think it's probably the leading reason to do
The
it.
point of it. Yeah. Okay. Warren?
I want to step back for a second and just say, I'm maybe getting old and moldy and have been on too many committees over too many years.
That's
But I
true.
think there's often a tendency for folks, when you're faced with having to make choices, to try to find a way to fit everything in.
Mhm.
And to just come up with big topics. Oh, we'll fit the finance into here, we'll fit this into there, and you can do that. But we're a small committee with limited time. We're going to accomplish more if we make some very clear choices and say, here's where we're putting our priorities. And I thought John's comments about the light plant just now were really good, and that seemed like a focused way to potentially deal with that task. I'm less enthusiastic about his comments about the buildings, but if we decide to go in that direction, I'd be fine with that. At least it's a focused direction. I think we should be making choices if we really want to accomplish things. And finally, to just say, that doesn't mean we can't reserve a little of our time to weigh in on other things as there are opportunities,
Right.
and to voice our opinions, but we should have some meaty projects where we're really trying to make change happen.
Yep. No, I think that's well said, Warren. And I think that was, the impetus behind this prioritization, this list, is there's many areas that we could provide input into, but we're limited. And what do we want to really focus in on this year? So, and not to say that it can't change or shift directions, and may want to as the sustainability director comes in, but I think this gives us a good framework, at least for jumping off. So I think maybe I'll phrase it a different way, and then someone else can respond. But I think we're landing on sort of this, I don't know what to call it, but oversight of CMLP, and there's we need to develop the specific around that, and maybe we build off of what John offered in terms of the principles that CMLP is building their future strategies and plan around, being able to speak into that process and develop sort of a hierarchy of the way they're thinking about it. And then I'm guessing more things will fall out of that. But if we were able to accomplish that one thing, and the next 6 months, like that, I think that would be great. The second thing then I think is the home energy score. And unless, unless there's a real driver otherwise, the way this is written is to, figure out what the policy would look like around that, right? Getting to the point of we need to mandate this, what would the policy be? And maybe what would the stretch be around that, to see if we can get more action faster, so that it's not a marginal near-term impact, but there's actually a medium amount of near-term impact, or we feel like there could be with what we are able to accomplish there. And then I think, again, I think what I'm hearing, and I guess this is what I'd like to get consensus on, if we can, is the idea of placing as the third sort of priority, if you will, this vulnerability assessment. Now, we haven't identified necessarily who would take that on, other than John. That's a given. And then Paul is a close second. But, you know, and we also haven't identified who from the town perspective would take that on, or who would champion that, right? So that's something that we need to, I think, put more thought into. But how does the group, the board, feel about slotting that in as sort of a third priority? Maybe it's not third, maybe it's, you know, just one of the top three.
You know, I was talking to Alice about that one, because when I saw that vulnerability assessment, I was curious, because I had thought that we had Lundgren Associates do precisely that going back, and I tried to go through the previous all of the things that are on the bulletin boards to see whether Kate had actually that report in there. But Alice has said that a vulnerability assessment was done as part of that scope of work. It was very deep, and it had all of the different departments speaking, DPW, police, Alan, the whole, many of the leaders in the various directors. So I just would want to caution us not to be redundant if this already exists. That assessment was I think very germane to the work that Lundgren Associates did for us. I'm going to try to dig in some more to see if I can find the specifics of it. There is a reference in one of the presentations that Lundgren Associates did where they cite having done a vulnerability assessment for the town of Concord.
Okay.
And maybe we look at that again to see if that is what we're thinking when we talk about vulnerability assessment for the town, that we know what that is.
Yeah, I think Lundgren provided an overview of climate exposure that towns in our region might face, but it's not a vulnerability assessment in the sense of looking at how those exposures will play out across the landscape and across the community in terms of people impacts. And then when the town joined the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, it's a two-phase process. The first phase is like a planning phase where you basically gather people around the table and do a tabletop vulnerability assessment, but it's not really a vulnerability assessment. It's really talking about exposure and people who know various systems, thinking about ways in which the systems could be affected, but it's way off when a vulnerability assessment would be. You know, for instance, that with all our conservation land, we would need to do an ecological assessment of how our forest lands and other habitat types are going to be affected by changes in temperature and precipitation patterns, right? I'm pretty sure the town has not done that.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, John, and maybe it's worth, I'm wondering, sure there's some presentations that you could provide to CAB to highlight the work that Cambridge has done in this realm, because it's significant. Different. It would be different, different things that we'd be looking at for Concord being a much more rural, less urban way. Right. But, just to give a flavor for what that would look like. But I think I tend to agree with you. It would be interesting to see if we could dig up what KLA did as it related to the Climate Action and Resiliency Plan. But I know when looking a little bit at the water systems, the information just isn't there in terms of climate data that we can draw from readily. We just haven't done that yet.
I mean, you would
And
have to model that stuff out, right?
that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure KLA did not, go to that level of detail. So I don't know, Michael, if that helps a little bit, but I do think it's worth just, making sure we're looking at what has been done and not, making sure we
right.
build upon that, not redo anything that has been done before.
Right.
So
It
thank
may
you.
not be quantitative at all. I mean, I don't know. I think John's point's well taken. Like,
Yeah.
did we, when we looked at water quality, or where did we develop scenarios of
Right.
the climate impacts and how that would affect, and from a quantitative standpoint,
Right.
supply, cost, resource, that deep sort of analysis. I
Yeah.
suspect maybe that was not done at that level. I don't know.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that, and I know it was not, but there may have been other ways, other things that they looked at related to public health or that sort of thing. I'm not sure, but I don't think, at least on the water side, that more in-depth look was done. I know they did do a buildings assessment, and I'm not sure again what level of assessment was done there, but I remember them discussing that in one of our meetings.
Yeah.
So, but I do think, John, to this point, sort of, figuring out what our role would be in that, in terms of the cab, because, my experience is that often that's undertaken by staff, and you probably know that better than I do, but right, and just where that would fall within responsibility and championing. So
Right. Well, I mean, obviously I'm modeling a little bit off the Cambridge work, but the way it
Sure.
all started in Cambridge is the Climate Advisory Committee in Cambridge wrote basically a 5-page recommendation to the city manager in 2010 saying there's a certain amount of climate change we're not going to avoid, so we should do a vulnerability assessment. And
interesting.
it laid out some of the basic facts, a lot of which Paul informed us on, because he used to come and talk to our committee. And then the city manager accepted that recommendation, and that's how we got started. Of course, we did a lot more than the city manager ever thought we would do, but and the town will have to make some difficult decisions about, the depth of assessment. And maybe you can't assess everything, so certain things will have to be prioritized, but I think it's critical to do.
Well, that's interesting, because again, I think something that struck me as I went back and looked through the blueprints is how many of them fall within, well, as I mentioned, CMLP and Public Works, but then a few other town departments. And I see that as a primary role of the sustainability director, obviously, is to be working, across those different departments. But what tools can we provide the sustainability director as the advisory board to strengthen their position in working with those different departments and getting those different departments to really integrate and not, and not be siloed, which tends to happen and can happen. But then I think that just stalls the progress. So, that's interesting. I'm glad you flushed that out a little bit more for us. Paul.
No, I was just going to say, I read some of the earlier documents about adaptation in Concord, and I agree with John that there's very little of any quantification. So, for example, if the water supply people are going to set targets for water conservation, they need to know exactly what the impacts. They need to know the range of impacts we're facing. It's not going to be exact because we don't know what the climate changes are going to be. They need to know the range of impacts we'll be facing. And also, it might be the role of this board to help provide oversight of any vulnerability assessment. And I know City of Boston, Cambridge, they all have citizen they always have citizens on steering committees.
Yep.
To provide oversight.
Yep.
So I think that would be a very reasonable role for our committee to provide.
Yep. That makes sense.
So yeah, I guess I'm all in favor of having adaptation somewhere in the top 3. But also I want to again point out that it's sort of not mitigation or adaptation. I mean, we need both, and we need to respect the synergies between them. We need to work as a board to support all these activities. But also I listened to what Warren was saying about, in order to be successful, we need specific actions. And I think that's probably right. So I'm sort of, walking back my comments about, let's set some broad goals. Let's try to lay out some specific goals and meet them.
Okay.
But thank you, Warren.
Okay. I guess, any other thoughts on adding the vulnerability assessment to sort of our top 3 with fluidity, but okay. And with that being said, I think I save this to the end. We're almost out of time. I want to make sure I guess I give time for public comment. I know Doug's been able to share already, but the one that is sort of near and dear to my heart is the one related to building standards. And while I fully recognize that that's not probably as mitigation oriented as some of the other ones that we've already talked about, and I think it doesn't surprise me that it's not one of the top 3. I think we can still make small inroads on that, as Warren was saying, kind of focus in on our top 3, but we can still have conversations as it becomes relevant, or as it's particularly relevant in different areas. So case in point, continuing the conversation with the school committee related to, potential envision use. That's one option, or as things come up that are, relevant. I think we can continue to keep these other priorities here on the list in mind, as it makes sense. So Warren, you had a comment?
Yeah, I would agree with your comments just now, but I also want to go back to one of your comments at the beginning, which said we should keep a little fluidity around this until we know the identity of the new sustainability director, because there may be, a couple of these things that are near and dear to that person's heart, but also where they will have skills that would enable them to make fast progress on one or more of these.
Yeah, I agree completely. So I think at this point, we will leave this as a discussion rather than any motion on this table or this list. And it's quite possible by October, our next meeting, there might be something known about the sustainability director, and whether we'd be able to meet that person or not, I don't know. But at least within the next couple of months, I would think it's the possibility. So I think we kind of leave this in the notes in terms of the discussion we've had. I think it's been really good and rich discussion. I thank you for for everyone's thoughts. And certainly as you go away from tonight, I'm sure things will come up, kind of flag those and put them down so that we can make sure that we capture those the next meeting as well. With that, I guess I will open to any public comment. I don't think we didn't really have any other items pressing on the agenda. I think we covered most everything. Doug or Matt, anything? Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that a letter went out to various committees talking about the Envision Concord long range plan, and
right.
a session coming up in November. then, and it asks the committees to talk about how they're going to fulfill the goals of the plan. Now, I think in Climate Action Advisory Board's case, you've got an overriding new plan, right? Which is, I mean, first thing you could say is, we accomplished something. We got this climate action resiliency plan done. Big check mark, big check mark. Okay. But then I think the next set of things is, and we're still working on kind of the format for this, but I would guess that, you know, first you say what you've done, and then second, you say what goals remain that you're executing against. And then third is anything that wasn't sort of anticipated by the plan that you think needs to be added, or, you know, that we're working on. So I just, again, I hope that we can provide better guidance soon, but given, you know, the cadence of meetings here, that doesn't give a whole lot of time to respond. So I just wanted to plant that seed here.
Did you give the specific date? You said November.
It's in the letter.
Probably in the email. Okay, we'll look at it, but maybe that is then an obvious topic of conversation for our next meeting, our October meeting.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry to
good reminder.
throw
No,
more work your way, but
Yeah.
well, that's okay. I think that's all good stuff there. So,
You know, the other thing I was thinking is that it's probably going to help us a good deal. What I've heard this evening is that at least the first priority that we've talked about in length, which is provide oversight of CMLP, will be aided by the intentions for CAB to have CMLP come right to one of the sessions and talk about their strategic plan.
Right.
And it may be that we need to get clarity on that oversight of CMLP. Does leadership at CMLP see that CAB has oversight? Is that,
right.
You know what I mean?
It's a good question. I'm not sure they do.
I don't think so. I think they report up to the town manager.
Right.
So it's in the end, just looking about where the relationships we've had with CMLP, it's going to be really an important goal for the new sustainability director to create that business relationship.
Right. Such a good
because
point.
Every one of our blueprints and just about anything we've talked about, including Brian's notion earlier about scale, relies on the Concord Municipal Light Plant exercising its strength and resources as our energy delivery provider to help, you know, close these gaps and to see what progress we're making. But that's so incumbent on the people at CMLP leadership agreeing that that's a function that they have, right? In addition to providing safe, low cost, sustainable energy, right?
Right.
So, and I think we'll get clarity on that because we did talk earlier at several meetings before that we do anticipate having CMLP come and tell us what's on their mind. Are the priorities that we are setting, are they the same priorities that they have?
Right.
Because if not, you can see why we're not going to make a whole lot of progress. And if they are, just need to be nourished, then we've got some actions to take. Right. So
it's a very good point. So I think that's, you know, that might be step 0 before step 1, right?
Before we start telling them, here's your oversight.
Right. You know, here's what we want you to do and how we want you to do it.
Right.
And they're saying, well, who the heck are you?
Right. Exactly. And then we'll say, well, you know, town meeting said that we would do this.
Right.
And then we're all caught up in this. I get
it might not be the right approach. So
right.
No.
Yeah.
I have a small comment.
Yeah, Doug.
This is just to give you a sense of, this came from a little tidbit that came from our meeting yesterday in CSEC, but it emphasizes the diversity of the kinds of issues that are in front of us in terms of issues that come up around town about sustainability. And we were visited by Deborah of Deborah's Gourmet in West Concord, who is put out an appeal to reduce single-use plastic waste in the town of Concord by allowing returnables to be allowed. This is to do with getting food, being able to take plastic containers or various containers to a market and be able to use them instead of using plastic bags. And they're appealing to the Concord Board of Health, who absolutely prohibits the use of returnables. And she was coming to us at CSAC to ask us if we could help endorse her position and make an appeal to the Concord Board of Health, and it could be used in her appeal to the Concord Board of Health. At any rate, it's kind of way off the table compared to what, we've been talking about tonight, but it's still an important ingredient in sustainability actions that the town could take. And so you might hear something about that as it comes out.
Yeah. Well, it's outside of the box thinking a bit, right? And it's evidence that that's part of our community. So that's great that you shared that. Thanks, Doug. All right. Well, I don't think I thought we would fill the time with our conversation tonight, but we sure did. And I thank you so much for all the input. I think it was great. I feel like we made some real strides on our priorities, and we will just, hold those a bit loosely as we move in the next month or two, but hopefully we can put some more structure around those in that time as well. So I'd say stay tuned.
Excellent.
our next
Thanks so
meeting.
much, Courtney. This
All
was
right.
terrific.
Yeah, thanks for filling in for that other guy. What's his name?
That other guy, yeah,
That's
that other
right.
guy who dissed us for some fun travel, it sounded like.
Hey, Courtney, don't we need a motion to adjourn before?
We do.
We adjourn. I
Yeah, we
move
do.
adjourn.
Thank you. All right.
You
It's-
actually don't need a motion. The chair can
don't?
just declare the end.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Oh.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
We've
you just have
always-
to declare who's at the
Yeah.
meeting at the beginning, but the chair can declare that.
We've always had a motion. Well, I
That's
feel like
right.
someone should
If you
second
want
it.
to, there's no harm.
Since Warren put out the motion, we should at
I
least
second the
second it.
motion.
All
That's
right.
right.
All in
Okay.
favor of adjourning tonight's meeting? Aye. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate that.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Good
Talk
job,
to you soon.
Courtney.
All right.